The offensive line class in this year's NFL draft has a lot of interesting prospects, but it does seem like there's a fairly significant drop-off when you get past the blue-chip, surefire first-round talent.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. On the show, we get into this offensive line draft class, specifically in the Bears draft range, in those second and third rounds in particular, right where the Bears have their first picks. We'll go through some of the first round guys that are potentially an option if they could fall, fingers crossed. These would be the guys you'd like to see the Bears have a shot to draft with their first second round pick. But if not, we'll go through some of the offensive tackles and guards and centers more in that second and third round range that should be there in some order for the Bears to have their selection of. A lot of different guys that played one position in college but might project to a different position in the NFL. And we'll kind of check in on where there's versatility and where there's necessity for positional changes. So I think to start, we should make it clear, like we did yesterday with the wide receivers, where we went through sort of the same sort of exercise here. There's a handful of guys in this class that are just not even close to realistic options for the Bears in this draft. There's not really any hope that they would fall down to where the Bears are picking without some crazy draft day, Laramie Tunsil level video comes out and draft stock falls. So that didn't even make Laramie Tunsil fall all that far. But just regardless, you got Ikem Ekwonu, Evan Neal, Charles Cross, and Trevor Penning are kind of like the big four offensive tackles at the top of this class. That's like, yeah, that's just not going to happen for the Chicago Bears. Then I think there's a pretty low chance. I guess you never say never because, the NFL doesn't tend to value guards and centers as well as they do offensive tackles. And so it would be more likely that the top guard or the top center would fall compared to the top offensive tackles. But I would put it as kind of I would say very low chance, but not impossible, that Tyler Linderbaum from Iowa or Zion Johnson from Florida State falls down to, Boston College. I always get their helmets mixed up, but seeing Zion Johnson at the Senior Bowl, I really fell in love with him as a prospect and was really hoping to see the possibility of him being available for the Chicago Bears. But alas, I just don't think it's likely to. I guess it's possible. He played guard in college, played some center at the Senior Bowl, could play any of the interior positions, and boy, would he be fun to have. It'd be a perfect scheme fit for what the Bears want to do with this outside zone, stretch zone offense. But regardless, I think I'm not keeping my fingers crossed for either Linderbaum or Zion Johnson. But from there, I think there's a more reasonable chance for the rest of the guys. And I think there's three of them that I keep in this range of, like, it wouldn't surprise me if they were first-round picks that the Bears never had a shot at, but it wouldn't be out of the question that they could fall all the way to 39 or close enough to where the Bears could make a fairly reasonable trade up without having to, give up all their major draft picks to go get one of these prospects. And we'll start with the guard because that's the more apparent opening for the Chicago Bears in the starting lineup right now. Kenyan Green from Texas A&M. He is a big guard, 6'4", 325 pounds. And really, he's not just a guard because, the guard was his primary position at Texas A&M, but he played, just this past season, he played left tackle, left guard, and right tackle. But primarily, a guard is where it's looking like he's going to be in the NFL. But he's explosive for a 6'4", 325 guy. He gets off the line of scrimmage quickly, either getting forward and run blocking or backing off in pass protection. And big, strong hands. Just one of these mean offensive linemen that Ryan Poles was kind of talked about, wanting a little bit more of that meanness. So he's got a lot of these traits you really like that would make him potentially a first-round talent there. But in terms of technique, there's a lot that needs to be cleaned up, and a lot of these just like bad habits that he's sort of settled into over the last couple seasons at Texas A&M, and part of that has come with way too many penalties. Like I think he had like 12 holding penalties or something just this past season, but I can't help but wonder with the bad technique more so than the penalties, if some of that can just be from being asked to play 4 different positions throughout the season, and that if you took Kenyan Green and just stuck him at right guard in the Bears offense, could you clean up that technique with him being able to focus a little bit more on this position and this side of the offensive line? Everything's going to be right-handed. Everything is going to be from that guard technique, and he doesn't have to think about 4 different things or to master 4 different positions as he's moving around and not really ever getting settled in one spot. So a lot to like about Kenyan Green that, again, could make him a first-rounder, but if he was there at 39, sure would be tempting to grab him and be your day one starter at right guard. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to go offensive tackle again in the second round for the second straight year, because if you draft a left tackle, you could move Tevin Jenkins to right tackle and maybe kick Larry Borum inside to guard. Or if you draft a right tackle, you could leave Tevin Jenkins to the left and also maybe kick Larry Borum inside to guard. I mean, either way, you want more young offensive linemen for your Bears offensive line to develop and really have those bookends for Justin Fields in the long-term future. So I look at Bernhard Ryman from Central Michigan as a solid option. He was a tight end to start his football career. Actually was like relatively inexperienced in football. He came over from Belgium or Germany, he's European. He was European raised and came over to this country and has sort of learned football and bulked up over the years. So, but as a converted tight end, moves really, really well for a guy who's now like 305 pounds. Great athleticism, good scheme fit again in this sort of outside zone stretch offense that the Bears are looking to run under Luke Getzy. He does have a little bit of shorter arms for offensive tackle, but I think he can still hold up at that position. But generally speaking, he's inexperienced. He's also older, being a late start coming from Europe and played against a lot of lower level competition at Central Michigan. So you wonder a little bit how well that's going to translate and, how sort of the developmental curve there with him. But I think there's still a lot to like that he could be a week one starting left tackle, I think, in the NFL right away. And then the other borderline first round tackle here, and some people like Tyler Smith from Tulsa better than Bernhard Ryman. Some people like Raymond better, but Tyler Smith from Tulsa is another one of these like strong, physical bullies of an offensive tackle, but surprisingly like flexible and can like move and adjust and anchor really well, right? He's not stiff. He's a little bit more smooth in that regard with that mean streak and that strength to really just latch his hands onto you and not let you go. Part of the problem is he'd not let you go and get some holding penalties in there. Like the discipline is not great. That the technique is still very much a work in progress there. He's generally just raw. But when you have that type of size and flexibility, you have the tools there, you have the ceiling, and he's the kind of prospect that an offensive line coach can look at, fall in love, and say, no, I can fix him. He has the things that I can't teach, and I can teach him all the things that he needs to clean that up and be, a Pro Bowl caliber offensive tackle with, ceiling type level down the line. Those are all sort of the first round type guys that, if they're there at 39, I'm sure would be tough to pass up as a potential best player available to shore up this Bears offensive line. But from there, there's a drop-off in this draft class for sure. And, among NFL draft analysts, a lot of variation on where guys are ranked. So we'll kind of go through some of the interior guys and then some of the offensive tackles a little later on. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Shady Rays. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed and very durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something that you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' protection program. It's unmatched. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every pair you purchase. They'll literally send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. So give them a try, and if you don't love them, you'll pay nothing. Full money-back guarantee. It's as simple as that. Plus, when you buy a pair of Shady Rays, they donate 10 meals to fight hunger in America. Exclusively now for Locked On Bears listeners, you can get a 50% off discount on 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses when you head to shadyrays.com and you use our promo code LOCKEDON. That's code LOCKEDON for their best deal of the season, 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, all backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. after the first round caliber offensive lineman, you're not going to find too many 5-star prospects there in this sort of second and third round range. And there's a lot of variety and a lot of flavors here, and it's going to kind of depend on, certain teams are going to view some guys higher than others, and also it's a little bit tough to figure out exactly where you want to play some of these prospects in this draft class. Because when I look at this like second and third round group of offensive linemen, and if I'm looking at, interior guys and guards in particular, a lot of the best guard options here all played tackle in college. So like, for example, Darian Kinnard is a name that's out here a lot from Kentucky. Big, 6'5", 325 pounder, because he played right tackle at Kentucky, but probably projects more inside to guard. And maybe some teams in some schemes, but certainly not in the Bears scheme. If they want lighter, mobile offensive linemen, Kinnard's going to have to be a guard. Rhyme unintended there, but he is a mean, butt-kicking run blocker who wants to hit you, wants to put you in the dirt, and wants to fall on top of you and make sure that you are punished every time you come across him in the football game, particularly in the ground game. Just strong, thick, meaty, classic mauling offensive lineman. The problem is, as you might guess when you sort of start sticking them in that type of archetype, pass protection can be a little bit more on the rough side for Kinnard. The technique is definitely sloppy for him. Like he's got some quickness, but he's not well balanced, right? He's not. His weight doesn't stay under him too well, and he can kind of get out too far in front. And certainly, some speed rushers can kind of get him off balance and having to like adjust. And so, like, even though he's not necessarily completely slow-footed, it's just not. It doesn't have that natural feel for him whatsoever. And it would seem like he would be able to handle a little bit better with less space at guard, to where he could stay more balanced because there's going to be less movement of him in pass protection, but he could still run block and be that enforcer on the interior of your offensive line with great size and strength to go with it. So there's a lot to like there, but not every team is going to love him at tackle. Not every team is going to love that at guard, and maybe they want something a little bit more smooth of an athlete, and maybe not the perfect scheme fit for the Bears there, but you could make him work better at guard, certainly, than at right tackle. Or what about Jamari Sailor from Georgia? 6'3", 320 pounds, left tackle for them the last couple of seasons. Probably going to move more into guard because 6'3" is a little bit, short for the NFL offensive tackle. I don't think he quite has the length exactly that they look for in an NFL offensive tackle, but I think he's got the versatility to where if you wanted to try him at tackle first and then kick him inside to guard, or if you have an injury and you need to just move somebody over, sort of the way the Bears did with Alex Bars a couple of seasons ago, where you don't necessarily want to make him primarily your left tackle, but he can do it in a pinch. I think Sailor can get that because he does move pretty quickly. He does have more of that good balance and still some pretty powerful hands. The problem with Salyer is that he lunges a bit. He's what we call a waist bender, where his upper body's getting way out too much in front of his lower body, and he just plays really high. He seems to have trouble sinking low enough. It's maybe not physically trouble, but just doesn't sink low enough consistently enough to really consistently hold up out there in space. When you bend at that waist, a lot of times you end up toast at the offensive tackle position. And so that's why one of the other concerns with him is that Georgia schematically did a lot to help him in their offense in terms of tight ends and moving pockets and sliding protections to his side as well, to make sure that he was getting some extra help in college in pass protection. And so there's enough to clean up there with him and enough size questions to where kicking him inside to guard could be a little bit more of a move for him, and enough questions too that keeps him more in this second to maybe even third round range, again, depending on sort of where you feel these guys. And I'll again emphasize that I'm not going through these guys in my personal, I haven't power ranked every offensive lineman in this draft. I like to put them more in these tiers of okay, we talked about the first round guys, now we're more these day two guys, and the exact order of the guys within each tier is going to be everyone's own sort of personal preference and opinion. But I think Salyer has enough of those kind of question marks that brings him down to this area, but enough of those physical tools and versatility that somebody will like him and probably get some kind of starter at some position where they can find room for him in the NFL. One other converted offensive tackle, or probably going to play guard in college or in the NFL in this range, is Sean Ryan from UCLA. 6'4" and a half-ish, 320 pounds, and he was UCLA's left tackle in that Chip Kelly, RPO sort of inside zone offense. Another one of these guys who's pretty explosive in the short area. He can in that sort of immediate phone booth type area, which again, sort of you associate with guards, but he's got the power, he's got big, strong hands, and maybe, given that he's got the length at 6'4.5" and 320, that he could also play some tackle potentially. It just seems like the better spot long term might be at guard, because he's not so much fast in terms of like long movement. If he's pulling in run blocking or sometimes like getting out in space, he's got like the explosive in the short area, just like the first step will be fast, which is easier to do at guard, whereas that when you're at tackle, there's so much more space he has to sort of occupy, and he's not as smooth in that area. Doesn't recover as well. But part of the problem with the explosiveness too is that he can be over aggressive and then can't recover as well from being over aggressive. Whether it's in run blocking and just like really skirting out in front and getting too far in front to where the offensive lineman or the defensive lineman can just go around you the other way, or in pass protection, exploding out of his stance and oversetting too far to the outside and letting rushers then have too much space to work on the inside. So it's just a little bit sloppy in terms of his footwork and getting out there with that aggressiveness and some of that inability to recover. He's also a little bit of an older prospect. I think he's 23, turns 24 this upcoming season, something like that. So all those like little red flags drop him down more into this range, but you can like the versatility and some of the physical tools there to sign yourself up and make him a part of your offensive line, that you can find a home for him somewhere and give him a little bit of that coaching and that cleanup. So that's like those are like the main like conversion type spots. But then the other player I'll throw in here is Cole Strange, the center. Well, the guard from Chattanooga. We're not going tackle to guard. We're going potentially guard to center in the NFL. He was their left guard, but at 6'5", 305 pounds, he has some real length there for that interior. And another one of these really explosive off the line of scrimmage. He's going to get, like, in terms of like reach blocks and getting movement laterally in this Bears outside zone scheme, Cole Strange would be a great fit at the center. Explosive, quick, pretty good balance though, because unlike like we were talking about with Sean Ryan there, where it's like he gets over aggressive, Strange is very smooth in getting there quickly and staying balanced over there, but also mean, aggressive, and physical. And I think he would be a really good fit in this Bears offensive line. He's just a little bit less in the strength side, right? And a little lighter in the lower body. There's some questions about his ability to anchor and take on NFL bull rushers and stuff like that. And part of that, like, because he's a little bit lighter, you'll see him go with like wider stance in his feet and pass protection. But sometimes being so wide can then also sort of take him off balance and make him vulnerable potentially in other ways. So it's like he does need to clean up and find that sort of happy medium space with his feet in pass protection. But and also a little bit of an older prospect. And of course, at Chattanooga, level of competition was a little bit on the lighter side too. But he performed pretty well at the Senior Bowl and seemed to show he belonged with some of the other big fish there. So kind of some different styles of interior offensive linemen. Some a little bit more big and strong. Some a little bit more, smaller and quicker. And the smaller and quicker ones would seem to be a little bit more the Bear style. But some of the offensive tackles might fit a little bit better in the Bear scheme on that interior than they certainly would at the offensive tackle. There's also some like actual legit solid offensive tackles in this range that, they're not the first round guys, but could have some of the same effect of either plugging in at left tackle and moving Jenkins over, or plugging in at right tackle and giving you your two surefire offensive tackles in this Bears offensive line. We'll look at a couple of the options that will be right in this range, plus some other names to keep an eye on here into the third round, and some more interior guys, just kind of rounding out a full holistic group of offensive line prospects in the Bears draft range next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears brought to you by our friends who make the world's best tasting protein bar, Built Bar. They truly have a product that's unmatched anywhere on the protein bar market. I've been really encouraged. Every time I go to the grocery store, I see their selection of Built Bars in the protein bar aisle growing and growing and growing, more of the different kinds of flavors down there and available. But listeners of this podcast can get an even better deal on them by ordering with our promo code LOCKED15 than you can get at the grocery store. But Built Bars taste like candy bars. They don't taste like crappy protein bar products that are too chalky or cardboardy. Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. They're soft, they're easy to chew, but they're all low sugar, low calories, high fiber, and high protein. You got to try them for yourself. Use that promo code LOCKED15, and you're going to get 15% off your next order. It's built.com, promo code LOCKED15. This offensive tackle class seems to drop off a bit more than some of the interior guys. If you start looking at those last offensive tackles, if you're counting them as guards, there's not like a great group of second round solid offensive tackles in that spot. If you like Kennard or Salyer or Ryan at tackle, then they can be pretty. That you can feel better about the draft class at the tackle position in that second round. But it starts to drop off a little bit more from here and get more in that late second round to third round and later type range for the next group of offensive tackles. Again, there's a variety of opinion on them, and I think that sort of the best of the rest here is Nicolas Pete-Frere from Ohio State. It's a French name, Nicolas Pete-Frere. Anyway, I can't pronounce it. It's Justin Fields' left tackle at Ohio State. He played some right tackle before that too. He might have been right tackle for Justin Fields and left tackle this past season. Regardless, 6'5", 315. He's got the NFL frame, has experience at both offensive tackle positions, and seems to really look the part to play either of those spots. Very quick into his stance for his size, and has a lot of the physical tools that you're looking for at that position in terms of strength, length, build, agility, mobility, etc. The concerns for him were that a lot of times this past season at Ohio State especially, his worst games tended to be against the best opponents. And you could kind of get a sense of maybe he was losing his confidence as those games would go on. If things would start to go bad, they would get worse. But if he was fine from the beginning, he could kind of ride things out pretty well throughout the game. So I have some questions about that, that you kind of just not off the field stuff, but between the ears stuff that teams would need to get to know him and talk to him that way. Plus, I just don't know that he's got the cleanest technique at this point. He just needs some development, right? His hands aren't always going where they need to go, and he's not always coming from a very steady base, both in run blocking and pass protecting. The tools are there and the pieces are there, and he's built the way he needs to. And he did go against some top competition. You just would like to see him go do better against that competition. But there's enough to like there that you can clean it up. And again, an offensive line coach will say, "Oh, I can fix him, and I'll take that classic NFL left tackle or even right tackle build and plug him and play in your offensive line." If you want to go humongous, really big, Daniel Faalele, the right tackle from Minnesota, is 6'8", 385 pounds. He is pure power, strength, anchor. I mean, you're just a brick wall at right tackle at Minnesota. But even for his size, he's fairly fluid, right? He's not fast, but he's not stiff, right? That's the difference. When we say fluid, he's not all that stiff for his size. He's able to he's a little bit smooth in his movements. Now, the problem is, of course, then at 6'8", 385, pass protection, moving around in space that much can be slow. Speed rushers can certainly take advantage of him and get around the outside not fairly easily, but more easily than you would like them to be. And he, too, is also fairly inexperienced to the game of football. I think he's Samoan. Or no, he's got parents of two different backgrounds. I don't remember. It was Samoan and another ethnicity. So I mean, he wasn't raised playing football. This was a sort of a new thing to him coming into high school and college, or late high school and then the rest of college. So very technique in terms of obviously some of the movement skills, but then also hand placement and timing of his punch and getting them where they need to be, and particularly in pass protection, because otherwise he's just going to bully you in the run game. But he's so big that I don't know. Can you put a 6'8", 385-pound tackle inside at guard? Maybe in some schemes. I don't think Faalele is necessarily a great fit for the Chicago Bears in terms of what they want to do in this offensive scheme right now, but it's a fun prospect in just how humongous he is. And he's even a little bit better. He's a little better of a mover than Zach Banner, the last humongous tackle that came through the draft prospect. I think he'll go earlier than that, but how early a team wants to take a monster like that with those kind of tools, that's going to be fun to see. The other offensive tackle here that I want to highlight was more of a scheme fit here, at least in terms of the skill set, but not so much everything that we saw on tape in college. Abraham Lucas from Washington State, 6'6", 315 pounds, really a smooth mover and really good at mirroring at that offensive tackle spot. I mean, he's, again, sort of like the Ohio State tackle, just built in that not too heavy, so he can play either side type of thing with good length, and he kind of fits the bill as an offensive tackle. Now, the problem is at Washington State, there's such a pass-heavy offense. I mean, they only ran the ball 25% of his snaps, and a lot of it tends to be, little RPO, little scheme runs, and it's not it's not like there's not a lot of tape to evaluate him as a run blocker. He wasn't asked to be like, this under center type stretch zone rushing attack that the Bears are expected to implement here with Lucchesi. It's just not something Lucas was asked to do a lot. I would say he's a good athlete, but not a great athlete. Not an elite mover at the offensive tackle spot, and so there's always room for some more consistency there. But in terms of pass protection, you could see everything you need to from him for the most part there, and it would be able to be a potential, day two, maybe later day two, plug and play type offensive tackle there. Maybe there's a limited ceiling there, some questions about the run blocking, but I think there's a lot to like there about Abraham Lucas, and it just kind of depends on what your flavor of offensive tackle prospect is going to be. So there's some different options there for the Bears to consider on the outside and the inside. A couple other names I'll throw in real quick. I'm interested about Luke Godecki from Central Michigan. He was the right tackle opposite of Bernard Raymond. He's kind of another one of these probably projects into guard, but could play some offensive tackle. Some people really like what they see from him. Some people see way too much inconsistency, and some of the evaluations on him have been all over the board. There's a pretty decent middle class of centers here with Dylan Parham from Memphis, Cam Jurgens from Nebraska, and later on maybe Luke Fortner from Kentucky. I don't know if the Bears want to draft a center, maybe a guy that could play center or guard is a different story, but they've kind of told Lucas Patrick, you're going to be our starting center this season. So it seems like if they drafted a center, it would be someone to play at guard, and then maybe down the line he could play center, figure it out from there. But the hole right now is at right guard. So there's like a Marquise Hayes from Oklahoma, or maybe Ed Ingram from LSU, but Ed Ingram did not impress me very much at the Senior Bowl, and he seems like a guy that not a lot of people are like overly high on, and if anything, he seems to have fallen a little bit in this draft process, despite having the LSU name on his helmet. So there's some decent options here, but it does feel like the flaws get a little bit bigger, or the questions get a little bit larger the later you go, which makes sense. But especially I think after that group of first round potential guys that you'd hope fall to 39, from there I'm kind of with the mindset, I don't know that the guy I get in the third round is going to be that much worse than the other guys I could get in the second round. Like if it's not, the Raymond, the Smith, or the Green that we talked about in the first segment, I'm not in a rush to draft one then at 39, and maybe not even with the other second round pick. I feel like I can find a pretty darn close to good enough offensive lineman potentially with that third round pick, and maybe go elsewhere with the other 2 seconds, or maybe trade down in the second and then get an offensive lineman. That seems to be where the sweet spot is in this offensive line draft class. Late second to third round, but that early second round pick, unless it's one of those guys that falls, that's about where I kind of see the draft class going right now for this offensive line class. We did the wide receiver class on yesterday's podcast. If you haven't heard that, go back and take a look at the day 2 prospects to know their similar sort of structure of first round guys that might fall, day 2 guys, second round versus third round type options for the Bears there. Tomorrow, I'll plan to do the same thing with some of the defensive backs in this draft class, barring any major Bears news that is more important and will need to take up that slot for us. So I hope that you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis, wherever you're listening, or if you're watching along here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, the Locked On NFL Draft Prospect is always breaking down draft prospects, getting you ready for draft day. We're just a couple of weeks away from, and so much more to get through. Make sure that you are ready to roll for the draft. So I hope that some of these prospect breakdowns have been helpful for you in getting ready, and most importantly, I hope it makes it just a little bit easier for you to bear down.